Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community Land Trust in a Just Economy. You all caffeined up? You ready? This is really going to be an exciting panel. So as the moderator, my job is to keep buzzing questions. We are not doing any kind of PowerPoint presentation. We are talking about community land trusts, going to scale, talking about access to financing. First, I just want to get a sense, hands in the room. How many of you have worked with or know about community land trusts? All right, good number. Great, great. I'm Aaron Maripal. I'm the president of Urban Land Conservancy. We're a nonprofit real estate company in Colorado. We do land banking. We develop affordable real estate. To date, we've done 12 developments that are in land trusts. The bulk of those are nonprofit facilities, schools, early childhood education, multifamily affordable housing, tax credit deals. Those developments have totaled over $200 million in direct investment in the community. It's an honor to be the moderator for this panel. We really do have, I mean this truly, an all-star group. These are practitioners who've been doing this work for a long time. Combined experience over 100 years. So not to date anyone, but I'm just saying when you combine it all, over 100 years of experience in community development and finance. In the program, we were going to have Shanti Abadan, thank you. Shanti is the Shared Equity Director for NeighborWorks America, but unfortunately, 2 ill children, so she couldn't come. So backfilling, fortunately, at an NCRC conference, we had another member, Katie Ulrich, with Proud Ground out of Portland, Oregon. And Katie is the homeownership program director and principal real estate broker for their organization. They have over 400 CLT homeowners, and I believe they're the largest community land trust in the state of Oregon.
The whole Pacific Northwest.
The whole Pacific Northwest. Okay, sorry. Okay, so yeah.
Not a competition, but.
Take that. You don't have Katie in your program. That's why I'm giving you a little bit more background. She's also a licensed realtor, certified in homeownership and foreclosure intervention counseling, and in post-purchase education through the NeighborWorks Center for Homeownership, Education, and Counseling. How's that? On my immediate left, John Smith is the Executive Director of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, DSNI. They're based in Roxbury, Mass. DSNI is almost 40 years in operation. Do I get that? Okay, almost 40 years. They're nationally recognized in their work doing community organizing that led to, I think, the largest or one of the largest community land trusts in one neighborhood. So just in Roxbury or in that community, there's over 400 CLT homeowners. Rental as well, I believe. Also, you have community gardens, you've got commercial, so they're doing it all in a very, very small geographic area, so very impressive work. I also want to acknowledge Juan Layton, who's over here. Juan, we'll show hands. Juan, former executive director at DSNI. He actually put this panel together, so want to acknowledge his work. He's now with NCRC, he's the director of organizing and advocacy. Did I get that right? Okay. On my far left is Geraldo Espinoza. He's the executive director for Local Enterprise Assistance Fund, LEAF, and they're in Boston, Mass. They're a very unique CDFI. Show of hands, everyone know what a CDFI is? Good, all right, most of you, okay. Community Development Finance Institution. You heard in the morning session a CDFI or Philly talking about their work. But they're unique because they're doing CLTs, co-ops, small business loans, and they're doing it across the country. So want to recognize that. And then finally, Tony Pickett, someone I've had the privilege to work with for over a decade. And I mean that, it's deep. Tony's the CEO of Grounded Solutions Network. They're based here in DC. They're a national nonprofit with over 200 shared equity members. That includes CLTs, co-ops, and inclusionary zoning programs. So this conversation and what it's kind of talked about in the program is access to capital is often a major obstacle for many community land trusts. In this session, we're going to talk about some of the newly formed partnerships with municipalities, state, and federal funds, along with the work of CDFIs, and how to create loan funds to increase property acquisition, expand the capacity of CLTs, We'll also take a closer look at the challenges and opportunities CLTs represent in today's housing crisis, both for tenants, homeownership, and I would also say small businesses. With that, I'm going to kind of set the stage for y'all. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. So over the last decade, Denver's grown by 19%. So we went from about 600,000 to about 725,000 folks. Over that same time, Denver lost 23% of its inclusionary affordable housing homeownership. So inclusionary zoning is a program through the city of Denver. It was a partnership with different developers. If you've flown in to Denver, there's the old airport known as Stapleton. It's now called Central Park. So they had a commitment there for inclusionary zoning, also in other communities. So we lost that 23%, so that's 370 homes that were lost, basically to foreclosure, to lack of qualifying, et cetera. So that 370 homes out of basically 1,700 homes. That's inclusionary zoning. Over that same decade, we lost 2 CLT homes versus 370. And those 2 CLT homes were actually purchased by the land trust, so they actually didn't get lost, right? Meaning those homes were bought back by the land trust and then they could get other homeowners into it. So I think that's a part of setting the stage about why CLTs. We talk about scale, we talk about we need to be getting lots of affordable home ownership, but without having the proper stewardship or protection, we end up, as we saw in Denver, we lose it. So with that, my first question is really to John and Katie. What is going to scale in a land trust mean to you guys? John? John.
Good morning. John Smith from Boston. Any Boston fans here? Okay, we got 3. Great, thanks. When Mayor Wu, who's our new mayor, was running for office, she sort of brought this front and center again, even though we've all been discussing it for a long time. And she brought up the racial wealth gap in Boston. And so if you've ever seen that report, it basically says that in Boston, sort of combined, black wealth is $8. For whites, it's $247,000. And then they broke it down further a couple of years later, because then they disaggregated and they talked about so there's the white population, 247. And they broke it down to Caribbean immigrants and other folks of color. And for them, it was 12,000. So she pledged at the time that that would be one of the centerpiece of her administration, was really tackling the racial wealth gap. So in our discussions with her before she actually became mayor, we had these, we spoke to everybody who was running for mayor. She eventually ended up winning. But she was very clear that land trusts would be part of her, in terms of her mission, that she would work with land trusts. We are yet to see it totally happen. I'll let you know when it does. But one thing they did do, one thing the city council did, and the city council, before it was just that the mayor made the budget and then the city council passed it. Now it's that the city council, they just passed some law where it's the city council has to be actually involved in making the budget. So when you're talking about scale, we at DSNI, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, we have this group of emerging land trusts called the Greater Boston Land Trust Network. And so it's 6, 7 groups. Some folks are doing stuff around gardens. There's a Chinatown group. There's another. Because for us at DSNI, we basically own and steward 38 acres in Roxbury, sort of bordering Dorchester. And over the last 30-something years, we really haven't moved out of that. But what we have been able to do in the last 3 or 4 years with this network is to serve as the convener of this network and also take our model and help other people build out their land trusts. So recently, we had a city allocation of $2 million. Nothing, but something in the sense that it was the first time that the council actually gave money specifically for land trust. And actually, Gerardo, who's sitting on the end, we can talk more about it, but we are basically working together to sort of figure out how to spend this $2 million between the 6 or 7 different land trusts who are part of the network. The first thing we have to figure out is how to get it out of the city, but we're still working that part out. So we're presently, at the present time, we are, the Greater Boston Community Land Trust is really looking at creating a fund to fund land trust, and we're thinking that at least 1 million or 1.5 million of that can seed that fund. We have a commitment of $100,000 from one of the foundations already to do that. So that's basically how we're bringing things to scale
Great.
in Boston.
I just want to acknowledge that your influence isn't just in Greater Boston. When I was in grad school many, many moons ago, DSNI was one of the organizations I looked at and was very influential about how, for me, I got into this work. So I just want to acknowledge that DSNI has been really, really a huge, huge player, and definitely is someone we look to in a really kind of, I'd say, honorary role, but also acknowledging the success of what you've been able to do in Roxbury. So just want to give that shout out.
Thanks. So people always ask, so I can just boast right now. So we have, in terms of housing, 227 units of permanently affordable housing, 77 co-op units, 53 rental units, and in 2023, hopefully sometime towards the end of the year, we want to build 12 new affordable housing units. And then for open space, we have 3 parks, a mini orchard, 2 farms, the Dudley Greenhouse, and planning 2 more gardens in the coming towards next year.
All right. Great. Thank you. Katie, can you give a little bit more on Proud Ground?
Sure, here, let me make sure. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So yeah, thank you. I am Katie, and I work at Proud Ground. So Proud Ground, interestingly enough, actually, I had similar experience with Dudley Street neighborhood initiatives. I found out about them really early on when I started working at Proud Ground, I think like the first week, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So it's really exciting to be here. So our organization, I think what is helpful when we talk about getting to scale is maybe just hearing a little bit about our history and how we have gotten to where we're at. Because I do believe, we've been around 22 years and we have 420 homes. We can't do that again and again and again. We won't make the impact we need to make. So the lessons for us really is, we were started by the city of Portland. They were realizing that people were going to be priced out, and we were founded really with a very specific purpose, and it is just for home ownership. They were looking at wanting to make this organization not really overlap services with other organizations in the city. So we were not a developer. We were really there just to do the community land trust permanent affordability piece. And it became clear as we were going, there was another community land trust at the time, started in the same year in a neighboring county of ours. And about 10 years in, they were looking at their funding sources not being there. And so we ended up having to merge with them. And so it became clear, there was a need in other areas. And so we have actually grown now to serve the whole state of Oregon as well as Southwest Washington, and we have service in 5 different counties active with 420 homes. And I think that, it's just a very unique difference here, and the model can be used more broadly to cover larger geographic areas. It is a very different organization than Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiatives. We look more to partner with community organizations in their communities to work with our buyers. So we definitely, I think the thing for us in getting to scale, it's about partnership. So we partner with developers, both for-profit and nonprofit. We don't do our own development unless we need to for a project. We also have, and about 5 years ago, and this will help us, I think, get to scale, is partnerships with Habitat for Humanity. So the local Portland metro region Habitat chose to do permanent affordability about 5 years ago, and they wanted to partner with us. Again, not replicating services in the same community. So all of the homes that are being built through Habitat for Humanity in Portland at this time are coming into our community land trust. And we are going to be doing the stewardship that community land trusts do so well to ensure that the homes stay permanently affordable. So I think that, I'm trying to think of other partnerships. I think that that is all I'm going to say now.
What's that?
I think I'm going to stop
Okay.
there because I know
Well,
there'll be more.
No, that's good. I
did I-
like the habitat piece because it's a good segue to Mr. Pickett when we talk about scale. Tony, you and I, years ago in Atlanta, had conversations with the Habitat there about the strengths of community land trusts. Since that time, you've made a lot of progress working with Habitat. Can you share some of that? But also, I was going to say, the big question, you put it out there, getting to scale. What does that mean to Grounded Solutions?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And before I sort of delve into all of that, I just want to acknowledge that the leaders and the organizations that they represent on this panel are all members of Grounded Solutions Network. And my connection to Dudley Street is that when I was a startup land trust executive director in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the first things that I did with the support of what was then called the National Community Land Trust Network, one of the predecessor organizations that joined to form Grounded Solutions in 2016, I went to Boston and spent time with the leaders at Dudley Street to understand what was a community land trust, how did it function, what were some of the lessons learned from applying it in Boston to really looking at how to scale it up in Atlanta into a citywide organization. And so I led that organization in Atlanta for 3 years before I joined Aaron and his team at the Urban Land Conservancy in Denver, Colorado. And I did not know then that I would wind up being the CEO of the Grounded Solutions Network. But when it formed again in 2016, I joined the board of Grounded Solutions. And eventually, when my predecessor decided to retire in 2018, I threw my hat in the ring and became the CEO. So that's how interconnected folks on this panel are. And Leaf is one of the newest members of the Grounded Solutions Network as well, I should mention. But this conversation about scale, I want to say, first of all, Grounded Solutions is comprised of a variety of different types of organizations, just as Aaron outlined. Those can be traditional community land trusts. Some of them are deed-restricted programs that operate as part of a municipal program. There are inclusionary zoning programs. There are Habitat for Humanity affiliates. There are NeighborWorks affiliates and community development corporations. The thing that unites us, the mission of Grounded Solutions, is to cultivate communities that are equitable and inclusive with housing that has what we call lasting affordability, going beyond this term-limited affordability that often comes with the public subsidies that are required to make homes affordable. When that can be permanent, it is best, but we realize that in some states there are legal impediments to having permanent affordability, so we use other mechanisms to, again, extend the affordability of the portfolio that is created by the organization. We typically, in the case of homeownership, call that shared equity. Today, there are, according to our data and estimates, approximately 255,000 shared equity homes across the United States. That is not nearly enough to meet the demand. We all know that. And so 2 years ago, I challenged my staff and our entire network and membership and partners that we were going to grow the scale from 255,000 homes by adding another 1 million homes over the next 10 years. I know that numbers of units are not the sole metric of impact, but I say if we don't measure it, we can't hold ourselves accountable. And so, again, I'm saying, let me be clear, we want to add another 1 million homes over the next decade. And so we're working with our members on the ground to put together multi-year strategic business plans that show how they're going to grow their portfolios over time. Fortunately, in the case of Proud Ground and others across the country, I haven't had to do too much convincing, they were already on that path, and they're already forming the partnerships, looking at opportunities to grow their portfolio beyond what has been over the years a very limited impact. And again, when I say over the years, the first community land trust was created 50 years ago in Southwest Georgia by African American farmers who really wanted to prevent themselves from being evicted from their, or displaced, if we want to use that word, from land that they were working as tenant farmers. And so when we start talking about today, the forces, the market forces, the gentrification, all the things that are acting to displace vulnerable families of color in particular, we need to be looking at the things that have proven to be successful over time, which shared equity, community land trusts, however you want to name it, term it, have proven to be effective. We have data that says so. And so I am approaching philanthropic foundations, I am looking at banks, CDFIs, and saying, what can you do to provide the resources that we need in order to grow the scale of the sector? I'm growing Grounded Solutions staff and expertise in order to do that. And again, I'm working with our members on the ground, so is my entire team, to figure out what is it that's needed in order to be the catalyst to unlock the potential for growth in the organizations that are part of our network. One of the approaches that I can talk about, and maybe we'll tease it out later in more detail, is something we call the catalytic land cohort, looking at municipal land banking as a means of creating a portfolio that can then be disposed of by selling it at below market cost to a nonprofit organization, be it a CLT, Habitat, CDC, and use that to create permanently affordable homes. And I will say, we can tease this out later as well, and several of you on this panel know this. Homeownership, again, yes, great way to start to address the racial wealth gap, not in isolation, because we also need to create really stable rental success in order for families to be ready for homeownership. So I'm encouraging our members to look at this housing continuum from rental to homeownership and everything in between when we're talking about growing the portfolio. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Tony. Araldo, same question for you, around the scale. You're out there as a lender. Maybe give a little bit of background about just the CDFI world you're working in, but how scale plays out for you.
Good morning, Gerardo, from Boston as well. And before I start talking about what we do and the points that Aaron mentioned, I just wanted to point out that we are a relatively new member of Grounded Solutions. And couple of months ago, I attended a national conference. It was great. I have found Tony to be really, really helpful in terms of his time and introductions, ideas. So I saw a number of CLTs present, and for the ones that are not members of Grounded Solutions yet, I think you would want to take a look at to see how that can contribute to your efforts by becoming a member. Tony didn't ask me to say this, but he will invite me a beer after that. Let me tell you a little bit about LEAF, and then we'll put it in the context of growth as well for CDFIs and the field in general. My sense, LEAF is a CDFI, and one of the reasons I think that differentiate LEAF and why LEAF is a little unique is that we were created almost 4 decades ago, and we were created specifically with that concept of shared equity. So most of what we do has this element of shared equity. So as part of that, we focus a fair amount on the cooperative model, and including cooperative housing and also on land trust, right? So that is part of what I would call the DNA of LEAF, and something also that is nice and gives us flexibility is that we are a national CDFI. So sometimes I like to say, and that is true, we have projects from Fairbanks, Alaska to New Orleans. Basically, we operate in 26 states at the moment. And in terms of growth, my sense is that this is a very unique point in time. I have been with LEAF for about 15 years, and my impression is that this is the best time I have seen, in spite of the crisis, or perhaps because of the effects of the crisis, in terms of the opportunities for growth and for financing to get to that scale that Tony was mentioning. I believe that particularly in the case of land trust, there are two factors that are kind of helping on the financing side of things. One factor is this aspect of what was mentioned before, of the wealth gap, which it happens throughout the country. My impression is that 15 years ago, some academicians were aware of this wealth gap. 10 years ago, the broader public, and with COVID, it just became evident to everyone that wealth gap exists, right? And there needs something to do about that. And that wealth gap also is linked with the aspect of racial justice. So those are powerful trends. Now, there is another element which also I think it is a powerful trend, is that increasing awareness of housing, and particularly affordable housing, as one of the components of what are called the social determinants of health, right? And 3 weeks ago, I was attending a meeting of the community land trust that is part of the coalition that John was mentioning before, and this is a community land trust in Chelsea, which is a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. I'm from Peru, so Spanish is my native language. And one of the ladies that is a representative of the community on the board, in Spanish, basically, she mentioned that when you're working 2 jobs and you can hardly make ends meet, when you can barely make rent payments, purchasing a home or buying a home is impossible. If that is your reality, you want to escape reality. And an easy way to escape reality is opioids. Right? So that was quite interesting. I think it's another way of illustrating this aspect of the social determinants of health. And I mention this because this is an ally for all these efforts of the community land trust, right? To the extent that you can look for them as allies. And I think a good illustration we have in the case of Boston, in the area where John's organization is located is Roxbury, and for the persons that are familiar with Boston, there is another neighborhood that is about a mile and a half that is called the Back Bay. And please remember this number because I think it just highlights remember the number is 33. In some parts of Roxbury, the life expectancy is 59 years old. And in the Back Bay, the life expectancy is higher than Tokyo, it's 92 years old. 33 years different in a mile and a half in life expectancy. And I guess if someone asks anyone what's one of the most valuable things you have is life, right? Well, they're cutting it by more than 1/3. And the one that is very conscious about this is Boston Medical Center is right in Roxbury. So they are aware that medical care is just less than 20% of the health of the. So they came up with this logo of wealth is health, and so they are very supportive of the work that John is doing and of the community land trust. So with all that, what I wanted to mention is we have powerful trends supporting both the interest and the financing for this. I think in the next few months, with the interest rates going up in the economy, probably that will cool off things a bit. But everyone's expectation is that will be temporary, right? We will not have these rates and inflation, hopefully for more than 9 or 12 months. And so things will pick up again, but these powerful trends are remaining there. So when we get to the element of a scale, which is I think what Tony is talking about, a million homes and so on, you have those trends, and then there is an industry that has been growing a lot, which I think is a friendly industry, which is the CDFI, of which Leaf is a participant. And again, it's a suggestion to look at some of the CDFIs in your areas and when you are working with CLTs, and to see what kind of efforts what kind of support they can provide to your efforts.
Thanks, Earl. A question back to you. So in my work in Colorado, the CDFIs that are there have been challenging. They tend to be more expensive money, 200 to 300 basis points. So if I can borrow from a bank at, say, 3%, the CDFI is going to be at like 5.5 or 6%. And so question back is like, how do CDFIs play a greater role, knowing like that rate difference is significant? And I know you said, yes, interest rates are going up, but still the point is that I can do better with a local bank than I can with my CDFI.
So there are a couple of comments in that regard.
Yeah.
One is that the CDFI have what you're referring to is the pricing of the loans of the CDFIs are based on two factors: the cost of the funds,
Right,
and the spread they need to do to cover their costs, loan losses, and so on, right? So what is variable is the cost of funds. Because if you are using, for instance, for cost of funds, what you are getting from investors, that will typically be, you already have a cost of funds of 2.5%. If you put the spread, then you are not competitive with the
Right.
bank. But that's not all the sources of funds.
Right.
You can get sources of funds from grants, you can get sources of funds from the government, and some of those are zero. So that allows you flexibility. For instance, I'll give you an illustration. In Massachusetts, we manage, for the state of Massachusetts, we manage the Massachusetts Food Trust Program, so we get grants, and many of the loans that we do are below 3%. Now, that's one point. The other point is that, and this is real, it's not marketing, is that banks are regulated organizations. So if there are delays, if things don't go as well and so on, the banks, not because they are bad, but because they have to follow the regulations, are tougher.
Right.
With CDFIs, you can get a lot of flexibility, right? So but both things are important. Flexibility and high cost doesn't work.
Right,
But
right,
both
right.
together work. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I remember sitting in a room with Goldman Sachs years ago, and a couple other folks, and folks were talking about Goldman Sachs as, well, our money's flexible. It's patient capital, meaning we'll go out 10 years, but we're lending at 9%. And I was like, that doesn't help, right? Like, we're buying land, we're holding land. We need low interest, money so that we can hold it. So there has been, I think, historically a disconnect with some of those big financial folks. And I'm going to you now, Tony, and the rest of the panel, but to you specifically about, to get that million homes, we're going to need access to capital, but we're going to need access to capital that is at that low interest rate. How does that happen?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because for the first time, Grounded Solutions is actually moving into innovative finance. We have a new VP of innovative finance who's been on the job 2 months, but has a wealth of knowledge and skill in this area. And we're looking at creating patient social impact capital and deploying that in certain select markets for the time being to demonstrate that we can be effective. The other thing that I think we need to be really clear about and mindful of is we are competing to access property. Corporate landlords, corporate entities are buying real estate at an unprecedented rate currently. So when we talk to major financing institutions, yeah, we need patient capital, and we need a lot of it quickly. The scale of their purchasing power dwarfs ours. We're talking billions, and we keep doing deals for, if not 50 million to 100 million, we're never going to be able to be competitive. And so we've got to quickly kind of move the needle and this conversation along. And I just want to be really clear, we partner with a large range of types of entities. And I will say this pretty clearly, the same folks that we're counting on at the federal level are supporting this corporate acquisition of residential real estate at the rate that they are not supporting us. So when we talk about advocacy, we need to all be clear about where we're focusing and what we're really advocating for. We just want to be treated equal to what they're providing to private interests who are doing the same types of things that we need to be doing.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Robert, I just quickly back. With that million home goal, do you see your CDFI as well as other CDFIs being able to grow with that, to be in a position? I'm not suggesting you're going to do all the loans for 1 million homes.
No.
But
Yeah, no, I understand. So the question is, this is a complex issue, and it requires a number of participants, right? And the CDFI industry, I think, would be one of the participants there. What is perhaps some limitation for the CDFIs is that the CDFIs are, some of them may be typically in a local area.
Right.
So it's very difficult to develop the expertise to do this if you are just working locally. So that may be an impediment, but there are enough national and large CDFIs where they can be a player. And another important element is this, that when we're talking about the financing from CDFIs, part of that idea is to be flexible.
Right.
So sometimes that financing of the CDFIs can be subordinated to other capital, right? So if that, let's say if CDFIs are 100 million, that can leverage easily another 400, right? So you have 500,000 in financing with that participation, and 100 million from CDFIs is not too much to ask.
Right. So for an example, if I'm borrowing from a bank and it's like 75% loan to value, so let's just say I'm buying a property for $1 million, I'm borrowing from that bank for 750,000. The CDFI can come in for the balance, the 250, right? You'll go up, you'll take that greater risk, but you'll do that balance of 250.
We have done for, again, on equity, shared equity models, in the case of housing cooperative, we have gone up to 110%. And you may say, why, how can that be?
Right.
Is that at the same time that we finance the acquisition, we also finance the development of capital for infrastructure there.
So I could borrow instead, that $1 million acquisition, which may need some rehab, I could borrow 1.2-ish million from you, because you guys would make up $500,000. Well, does everyone follow in this kind of track of through? So that's really an important piece. So you're in that subordinate role, taking greater risk to make this deal happen.
That's why CDFIs were created.
Right.
For.
Yep. Understood.
I mean, it's got to be
Well,
reasonable risk.
I'm glad you said that's why CDFIs were created. I just want to Not all CDFIs think like you. I just want to reiterate that. Just know that, okay? So, I'm sorry. No offense to any of you other CDFIs out there, but I'm just saying. Katie, John, you're getting to this conversation about scale, access to capital. What are the things you've seen that from capital, from, again, the kind of creative ways that you've been able to make deals work?
Thank you. So, I think when we're talking about funds and loan funds and those fees, I think the biggest challenge is really where the, if you call it the buyout financing, is going to come from, or the initially that long-term subsidy that stays in the home. It's eventually the loan needs to be paid back, and so we need to also then have access to funding that can stay in the home as permanent subsidy. Proud Ground has actually been pretty creative, I would say, of getting, we weren't the first, I'll just say, but one of the things that we do to get homes into our program is more of what we call like a buyer-driven model, where we actually secure grant funding, mostly federal dollars, to become down payment assistance or acquisition funds for the home buyer. That fund usually covers at least 20%, if not probably 30 or 40% of the purchase price of the home. So it is a huge down payment. It means that the buyers avoid private mortgage insurance. We don't have to worry about the loan to value issues. And they are able to then go shop on the open market and find an existing home for sale, market rate home for sale, enter into the contract, and that home basically becomes part of Proud Ground's community land trust at purchase. So by us putting in that large grant funds at purchase, home buyer owns the house, we own the land, and it stays permanently affordable. So it works well in a market that is not, it worked really well, I think, in Seattle and some of the other areas before it got too expensive. We are right on that, we're struggling this year. Just our prices have gotten really high, and it's hard for us to get enough grant money for the purchases. But it's a great way to get to scale, especially if you're not able to get a project together for new construction, or just the time new construction takes can be a challenge. I don't think I have anything else right now.
John, you want to add?
No, I was just saying, it's very much the same with us. Boston's a very expensive city. And it's interesting, when Tony was talking about the same, banks and stuff that you go to are the ones that are. So Boston has medical institutions, educational institutions, and tech. The people who are buying the city are the medical institutions and the educational institutions. They're nonprofits. They operate as nonprofits, and they have billions of dollars, and they don't pay any taxes. And they have a program at the city of Boston called Payment in Lieu of Taxes that they're supposed to pay. And if they want to pay $1, they can. Nobody does anything about it. So that's a serious issue, because they are actually in our communities buying all the housing, for dorms, but they're tearing them down and building research facilities, which they're being funded by the tech folks, right? So because remember, Harvard is a brand, and BU is a brand, and Boston College is a brand, and they all have research, and they all have development, and they all have. So that's the pressure we face, like in our city. So, very much what you're talking about. Boston has become a really expensive place to live. I think we're like behind San Francisco, right? Just behind. And when we go to bank, and I'm happy Gerardo's here. I know nothing about financing. It's not my background. He does everything. So I take him to all the meetings with me. But, and think about, we have a partnership with BMC. He was talking about BMC. BMC has $1 million that they want to spend, and part of that they've spent with us. But the folks we're working with there are as a medical doctor and a surgeon who run their community engagement, who know nothing about community engagement, right? So we literally have to walk them through this whole process of how you actually engage with community, what does patient capital mean, how do you actually deploy these. But because that whole 1 mile he was talking about, because they understand that, and because they understand, because they see the, one thing we talked about at Tony's conference, we did a panel on health and housing, and we talked about, the value of land trust is that it provides stability, right? Land trusts do not solve everything.
Right.
And we're going to have an interesting argument about wealth creation, and I agree. It does not create wealth. We can argue about that, which we probably will. But if it's as your first step in your first house, and what people tell us is, given the price of homes in Boston, if my mortgage, my payments are like $1,000 versus $4,000, then I can live with that. And should we encourage people to live with that for the rest of their lives? No. But because right now what we're facing actually in terms of the work that we're doing, because DSNI's, it's 30-something years old, most of these properties, there's a lot of deferred maintenance.
Right.
A lot of deferred maintenance. And so we have to find funding for that. So that's like when you're talking about scale. When we talk to the folks in the network, when they ask us, what has been your experience? Yeah, it was a great organizing experience. We created the land trust. The land trust has benefited many, many folks in our community. But there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and those folks who are in that land trust right now, who are aging, who some of them they can't pay for those maintenance costs. So we're working on creating another fund that will do.
Is that something you're doing with Geraldo? Is he going to be providing
He's absolutely going to help.
low interest capital for renovations? That's great. Okay, I hear your name on that. Great.
Thanks for throwing it in. Yeah.
So this piece about, again, the realities of running CLTs, the factors of finance, et cetera. I think in our world, in Denver, for instance, and we're at the NCRC conference, right? Talking about Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, that's a core component of the work of NCRC. The reason we got one of our lenders, a bank, to invest in us was around CRA. That's why they made the investment. And it's actually in our revolving credit agreement with that bank that they're getting CRA credit for every deal they do with us. And so that's another component that I would put out, and I guess kind of back to the panel, I don't care who at this point responds, but kind of in general, how you see CRA as a role in this access to capital in the work of CLTs.
Mr. Pickett.
Really? Anyone jump on that?
I mean,
Katie.
I could speak a little
Please.
bit to just an experience that Proud Ground has had. So actually speaking to John's point about deferred maintenance, our, this gets into the weeds a little bit, but our homeowners have not been able to access home equity lines of credit. And so that has just, all the banks we've been going to, we've been around 22 years, they weren't going to do it. This one bank that is a more smaller bank, I would say, said, let's figure this out. And basically went to, all the way up the top, and now we do have a HELOC option, or a home equity line of credit option for our home buyers. But I think that's something that's, we do need to look at these homeowners and their needs and the needs of the community, right? It's in the community's interest that that home stays in good condition as well and is able to serve more and more households over time. So I do think it is a large need in the area. And I do want to speak just briefly to the wealth creation.
Sure.
Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because when you said that, it took me back to, I think, when I started at Proud Ground 18 years ago. And I'm out there trying to talk about this model, right? And this one woman that I was working with was just like, oh, CLTs, that's great, you're doing good work, but that's not wealth creation, right? So I sat down with her and I said, well, I did the resale formula, and in my example, the homeowner was walk away with $25,000. And she just started laughing. And she said, well, honey, that's not wealth. And at that time in my career, I was like, wow, $25,000 sounds pretty good to me. I think we need to think clearly about what is wealth and what does wealth mean. I mean, $0 or $25,000 is way better. And Proud Ground has actually just recently, this last year, reached over 100 homes that have resold through our program. And the resales are like the most exciting part of what we do. Our homes are becoming more and more affordable over time, which will allow us, I think, to possibly do repairs upon resale. But the other thing that we've noticed is similar to other land trusts across the country is about 60%, maybe a little over 60% of our homeowners go on to buy a market rate home with the proceeds from their sale. So it's not just, I think it's important when you talk about wealth creation, like this is one piece of wealth creation. What we need to do as a group is do way more with asset building in general. And if someone can purchase a house at an affordable price and stay there forever, a lot of people do that too, right? This is their forever home. Their low monthly payment allows them to invest in other areas so they can start saving for retirement or education, go back to school, improve income. So I think when we talk about CLTs and wealth creation, they're creating wealth in a lot of different ways. Yeah, so I just.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
And I just want
steal your
to
thunder?
tag, no. I just want to tag on because the numbers, the research that we did over a 30-year period on shared equity performance says that the average tenure of a family in a shared equity home is 5 to 7 years. And the majority of those families, over 60%, are making that transition to traditional market rate home ownership. So without shared equity, they would not be homeowners. So we're giving them that catalyst for upward economic mobility to get to the status one day of wealth. And that takes more than one generation, probably. The other thing, Aaron, around CRA, I just want to say we partner with NCRC and the broader coalition of national partners who have been advocating for CRA reform because it's not just this, CRA is going to convince financing institutions to do the right thing. They're also getting credit for investing in creating sports facilities in neighborhoods. So we need to kind of really ask some questions about what's the real credit being granted for, and if investing in financing sports facilities and creating those jobs is given more weight than actually creating homes for vulnerable families, I think that says something about the misalignment of the goal.
Yep. Which is why, as you heard yesterday, and reiterate, make sure you get your comments on the CRA reform that's happening now. So stadiums in the future banks don't get credit for financing billion-dollar stadiums. Geraldo, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I think the CRA is very important because at the moment, for instance, we do get, when I say the CDFIs can play a role,
right.
Part of the reason why we can play a role is because of the banks through CRA supporting the CDFIs, right? So to some extent that is happening now, but again, the other element is we're talking about the scale.
Right.
And when we take a look at the capital markets, particularly what is needed for that 1 million homes, you need hundreds of billions, and that's not going to come from the
It's not going to come just from you.
Not only from us.
Okay, all right.
And that's where you need the banks
Right.
encouraged or nudged by the CRA. Yeah.
Yep, which is a really good segue. So, folks, we have about 15 minutes left. Questions? We have a mic in the front here, so if you want to go up to the mic, please do. And tell us your name and where you're from, please.
My name is Archibald Hill. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I work for a community development corporation in probably in a 30% AMI community. We're one of the most blighted communities in the state of Alabama, 561 vacant, dilapidated land bank homes. When I seek funding from either banks or municipalities or federal governments, we get 1 to 5 houses. So when you say scale, I'm very interested in scale because I got 561 problems and I got 5 houses. It takes me about 50 years to get it done.
Right.
So this is very intriguing to me. Tony, I've been looking at you long enough. We go back. I got to talk to you from Atlanta. But my question is, I feel like I'm at the bottom of the barrel, if you will, in trying to figure out affordable housing for very low-income people. And that I keep telling the story, and they say, okay, here you go build two. How do we begin to lay the groundwork, and I'm asking for help, because CLT is a way to get to some scale and to make catalytic differences.
Yes.
I think that's the key. How do we begin this process? What do? We have a land bank that I think is not as functional as it could be. It has 10,000 tax delinquent properties in it right now, and we get about 1,000 a year. And so I'm working against I've just raised my hand. I'm really interested in the work that you all are doing, and how do I transplant that to Birmingham, Alabama?
I'm so glad that you made that comment and asked that question. I can tell you that Birmingham is on our radar. In fact, just last week, I was having a conversation about it. I continue to have conversations about you all. Let's connect after this, and we certainly want to have more direct conversation with you about what your challenges are and how we can be part of helping to solve for some of those.
Yeah. Katie or John, do you guys, any insights you have? I mean, I was going to say, Dudley, I mean, didn't you have a lot of vacant lots?
Yeah, so 30-something years ago, before I was born, basically it started because of organizing. Because those folks in the neighborhood, the story of DSNI is the story of community organizing. The folks who were in that neighborhood decided that they didn't want folks to dump their cars there, set fires, and do all the things that they were doing within this black community. And so it was black people at the time who went to the city, and they were able to get eminent domain over that land. That's how they got started. And then the building came from that. So much like, we don't develop the land, we own it, right? And folks develop it for us. But it was really through a community organizing process of going to the city and demanding that they get that land. And then they got eminent domain over it, which we still do. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't want to predict the answer to your challenge, but John, it sounds like to me what's being described is the land bank has control of property. They don't need eminent domain. They have an agency that has control of property. They need to get that property transferred over and work out what is the source of subsidy and financing to develop those properties as shared equity properties. That is what I think we need to be talking about.
Yep. Yeah, good point, Tony. Thanks. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm a community organizer in Austin, Texas, and work on housing policy citywide. I wanted to ask a question.
What's your name? Sorry, what's your name?
My name is João Paulo, but you can call me JP.
Okay, JP, thank you.
I wanted to ask a question that's also a bit of a provocation, and I want to go back to the wealth building conversation. And I think, for me, what's more interesting is the way we talk about home ownership, because I think there's a fundamental tension or a contradiction in the way we elevate home ownership. I have been in countless meetings about anti-displacement strategy and how do we prevent displacement, and home ownership is constantly elevated as a strategy for preventing displacement, keeping folks stably in their communities for the long haul. And then home ownership is also presented as a tool for building wealth. And it seems to me that there's a tension there between those two realities, because the very mechanisms that make the land under my feet such a profitable investment also drive the processes that displace me from it. So I wanted to ask you guys if you guys have thought through some of that contradiction and some of the major resistance that we see in our community towards homeowners joining community land trusts or selling to community land trusts is precisely this idea that you're taking this thing away from me that's kind of my retirement and savings account. And the second part of that, if I can sneakily tack on an extra piece to this, is a question about the way we kind of elevate home ownership as kind of a higher status in our communities, which kind of reinforces the idea that tenants and other folks in the community are almost kind of in a, you know, there was once a speaker that spoke at our county commissioner's court who said, you know, there's 3 tiers in Austin society. There's the homeowners, and then there's the renters, and then there's the unhoused people, right? And I think that that kind of pyramid exists in our minds sometimes, even when we reproduce a discourse of, you know, well, let's all build up towards homeownership as though that were kind of a reality that's even possible for everyone. So I wanted to ask you guys about these tensions around the idea of homeownership, and if you have any thoughts.
I was going to just lay the ground on that. That's great questions, JP. So there is a really astute, incredibly knowledgeable person who came up with a term that I've been using now for the last several years. It's called in-placement. It's a policy about how do we ensure, and it's not, homeownership is just a component. It's about how do you control the land, how do you control enough of the real estate in a community to ensure that it's not just the homeownership, it's the rental housing, it's the small businesses, right? All of those are a part of an in-placement policy. So I'm going to turn it to you, Tony, since you are the one who gave me that phrase, in-placement.
Yeah, and I was actually in Portland, Oregon when I coined that term, and the reason I coined it was because I was tired of talking about anti-displacement. The cure for something is not anti whatever the bad thing is. We don't call it anti-illness, we call it health. So, so that was kind of like in the back of my mind when I was kind of like describing this approach. And I think your comment in my mind translates to this idea of community wealth. You know, what we're really talking about with community land trusts in particular is an emphasis on communal group benefit versus just the benefit to the individual. If we're working for the benefit of the individual to the exclusion of the benefit to the group, that's not a great situation. It's not sustainable. And so I'm saying we've got to balance individual benefit with still keeping in mind that the overall larger group that the individual belongs to needs to still derive some benefit. So if we're putting all of the financial gain in the hands of the individual, it's not healthy. It is not sustainable. It is not the most viable path towards achieving maximum outcomes, positive outcomes for the larger group. And I think earlier we were kind of talking a little bit before this panel, and I've described it this way, and several of our land trust leaders describe it this way. There's this big C concept of community, really having, you know, racial, cultural, social ties that bind a group together, a common identity and experience. And then there's the small C community, the demographics of folks who live in a specific geography, their income isolated by itself. We're trying for the big C versus the little c. And I think people toss around the term community, and I hear a lot of them, in my mind, they're talking about the little c, and we're really thinking about the big C. And there's also nothing wrong with starting with the little c and evolving that into the big C. So if you're talking about starting out with a community land trust and you need to start with the little c first, that's fine, as long as you're bearing in mind that there's needs to be some contemplation of the big C at some point in time when you've proven that you can actually have an impact even on the little c population. So I just kind of really encourage folks to unpack some of this in terms of a community conversation about what's the goal of the effort. Is it to benefit just the individual? And Katie talked about it. When we're designing resale formulas, there are a range of options to that. And we're also saying to folks, let's model some of those. If you give more of the gain to an individual family when they resell, that lessens your ability to keep the home affordable at the lower income level over time. So maybe you need to look at balancing those two, giving a family enough to make it worthwhile for them to invest in purchasing the home, but also retaining enough to keep that home affordable without having to go out and do the work of finding additional subsidy, which is harder and harder to find over time.
John, you look like you were going to say something.
Now deal with that.
I want Tony to come to Boston and sell his house in the community land trust and get $15,000 to $25,000 and then make a down payment on an $800,000 house. So that's what I want. So I agree with you. So I think that we have robust debates about this. And I think that the idea is, so my pushback is we go into all these meetings with banks, philanthropic organizations, everybody, and they talk about wealth and wealth and wealth and wealth and wealth, right? Do I think community land trusts are important? Absolutely. Do I think it's a great place to start? Absolutely. Do I think that we need to reframe this discussion about wealth? Absolutely. Because I think that on one level, it's the great philosopher, am I saying it right? Philosopher, Shaq, said that there's a difference between being rich and there's a difference between being wealthy, right? There's the rich and wealthy, right? So this whole idea of wealth is sort of an interesting thing because then we're basically trying to dismantle the master system with their tools, right? And we're sort of constantly in that conversation. So what do we do to disrupt that conversation? Is it important for people to have housing? Yes, because Tony's right. It creates community. What we've seen in Roxbury and Dorchester, that's a really strong community. And, you know, I was telling Gerardo yesterday, you know, sometimes you go into meetings with folks in that community, they know when who's not home and who didn't park where and whose plot didn't get used and all this other stuff. And it's amazing to watch them, how they interact with each other, right? But they're also very much aware that they live in a city, and if they sell their home, they may not have anywhere to live. They may not be able to afford to live in that city and therefore not live close to where they work, right? And they may have to leave the city and then take, as one resident described to us, now I have to take 2 trains and a bus to get to work, right? When I didn't have to do that before, you know, so missing living on the land trust. And then you have to deal with landlords who, right, you have rents that are rising, right? So when they were living on the land trust, it was at a certain level, they could afford to pay that, and you know, so they decided to move and do something else. And now every year her rent is getting higher and higher. So the argument is valid. I think the whole idea also of community, because back in 35 years ago, you had an all-black African-American neighborhood. It's not that way anymore. Now you have African, Cape Verdean, right, Latino. You have so many different populations there. And their whole concept of community is very different, right? So we have to always recreate this idea of what community means and sort of learning to trust each other and learning to, right, again. So I think all those struggles are real. And I'm not one of those people who like, there's easy answers to that. I think there's robust discussions around it, and we need to do that. But I'm not going to say it's easy. Having said that, I do advocate for people to look into more community land trust and what it means.
All right, so I'm going to ask my questionnaires. Thank you. Really brief questions because we only have a few minutes left. So your name and where you're from.
Good morning. My name is Christy Penny. I'm the Director of Policy and Grant Making with Hope Partnership, which is in Orlando, or in Kissimmee, Florida, outside of Orlando. And we're trying to make sure everyone has a safe place to call home. Luckily, JP basically took the words out of my mouth. So I was mostly wondering, as Orlando, this may not shock you, but we're behind because Florida is trying to figure out like community land trusts and housing. Do you have suggestions on how to braid? Because you mentioned preparing folks in rental and making sure that exists before jumping into home ownership. And I feel like in our community, we're just like, oh no, let's give you $10,000, you can buy a home, which you can't do. So do you have suggestions on, I guess, how to braid those two pieces together? Or what has worked in your community to try to do that? Or if it's not working?
Oh, no, I think the moderator ought to take it because his
Oh,
organization
man,
works
no.
almost
Okay, so-
exclusively in rental.
All right, so I'm going to answer really quickly. So yeah, I think in the world of our work in Denver particularly, we've done a lot of land trusts that are multifamily residential, they're tax credit deals. So kind of like what Katie was talking about, we don't do the vertical development, we own the land. And we put that's in a trust, and we ensure that the developer is doing what they say they're going to do, and it's multifamily rental housing. That is a starting ground for folks to, I would say, get some wealth built up. And then the next step is to go into home ownership. Now, again, our market has gotten crazy where the average home price is a little over $500,000. And so we now have a local home ownership community land trust, Elevation Community Land Trust, and the local Habitat are working with, obviously first-time home buyers. There's a disconnect between scale, right? So on the rental side, we're probably doing statewide 3,000 units of rental housing a year. That's not a lot, but I'm just putting it in perspective. On the home ownership, maybe 200 homes a year, okay? So what I would say is like, getting beyond your question, but to say we need to have more resources around the home ownership side so that we can get folks who are ready to buy and may not be able to buy in the market, but who can be a homeowner in a community land trust, that next opportunity. Again, what's the largest subsidy for housing in this country? Anyone? Mortgage interest deduction, right?
Oh, yeah.
So our CLT homeowners, they get to do that. They get to do that, right? That subsidy is over $120 billion a year, just to put it in perspective. So, all right, next question.
Hi, I'm Barb Van Kerkhove with Empire Justice Center in Rochester, New York. Very excited for this discussion. And yes, just like Aaron, John, I read the book about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in graduate
Streets of
school.
Hope.
And so it just turned me very passionate about this. And one of the questions I had goes to this really great discussion about wealth. And I think we need to even, like somebody up there said, it's the master's tools. We don't want to use the master's tools. So I want us to think about why do we even need individual wealth, right? And I think it's partly because in social democratic countries, people don't need wealth as much because there are support systems in place for families and for individuals as they grow and get older. So I think that's for us to have a discussion around. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, and if anybody has a comment about that.
All I can tell you is I second that, but I also say because of our history with race in this country, it's a different
Yes,
conversation.
yes. Yep, yep,
We have to account for that.
that's right. Yep, totally. Yep. Thanks, Stuart.
Every single time.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Will Gonzalez, the Executive Director of SEBA in Philadelphia. Talking about bringing things to scale and about CDFIs. I mean, I see CDFIs as helping those who need help. More mature organizations, CDCs, land trusts that are more mature, should be going to the banks. The banks, we need to help make them accountable. The CDFIs should be for those who need the little assistance, right? So the other thing is, with institutions with huge endowments and brains, like Harvard, they should be hopefully willing to make investments. 1%, 2%, 3%. We're trying to pilot something in Philadelphia where one foundation is going to be providing a $200,000, 20-year, 1% loan. Now, they could make more money investing it in guns, but instead they're going to invest it in this CDC. And so how do we now bring that to scale to get foundations, endowments, who may not get a return on the investment that the market bears, but that the social capital, especially since they teach courses about it at their university. So I just wanted to see where, bring in the Boston story, since you have so much ed there and huge endowments, What's the possibility of bringing that to scale, and how do we sell our product to them?
Please, no.
It's the
Yeah.
finance man.
No, here is, I think, when I'll go back to what Tony was mentioning, this aspect of the innovative financing. That's what you are talking about, right? And that's in the same time that we're talking about the endowments, and that's why I say this is a very auspicious time, because when you have the endowments, typically what has been the situation is that the endowment has been invested in what they call asset classes, equities, bonds, alternative investment, which many times means hedge funds.
That's right.
And so the corpus, and then the return is the one that has been given, right? But the movement that started about, I would say, 10, 15 years ago with the Heron Foundation, they were saying, why don't we start investing our corpus in mission, right? And that is scaling up. And in terms of the community, we have in Boston, we have the Boston Foundation, the Hyans Foundation, and this is an active question for them. How much of their, so I agree with you. This is part of the solution to
Yeah, I see the doors are open. We're going to get one quick question. Rapid.
I know I don't have time. My name is Jessica Maria from Charlotte, North Carolina. This is my official friend request because I don't have time. Hopefully y'all accept it. But I know I had to say something about Charlotte, North Carolina. We're the second city where corporate landlords are buying up the most houses. 40,000 in the state, 25,000 in Charlotte. So we're competing with Wall Street-backed corporations, right? We have 120 people coming into Charlotte every day, and we have, I believe, a 30,000 deficit in affordable housing. So how do we get to that point? And I'm talking baby steps, right? We're looking for solutions. What's that first step? What's that? How do we get to municipal land trust? How do we get to that point where we're able to compete with now we have forced tenants. They're buying homes in working class communities.
Yep.
What do we do? That's it. Friend request.
Okay. So we can answer later, you're saying, or?
If you want, they want to hear.
Okay. All right.
I thought it was phone a friend.
I was going to say, is there a specific, right now, what you're talking about, we're experiencing as well. Are there a few neighborhoods you can focus on? Can you get the local municipality, county to focus with resources? Again, everyone knows about ARPA funds, right? The stimulus, like $1.9 trillion or whatever was passed last March. So your local city, your local county, your state, they all have ARPA money. And so that, to me, is the place to start. Put some ARPA money in these neighborhoods so we can get some affordable housing. How's that? All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Archie, man. I know I was sitting here looking at you.